This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Well, thanks very much for letting me come and speak today. I have to warn you, I have got here this morning straight from a private view of the opening of this exhibition last night, so I can in no way let you know whether it's been in any way successful until I get back and check my emails. But I will today talk about its conception and the development, and it's really coming from a curatorial exhibition making point of view, so actually looking about making those decisions, what to include, because this is approaching the emotional object with a view to putting it in a public space and eliciting responses from people, emotional responses. So the exhibition is actually concerned with textiles when used as a therapy. So that's either an occupational therapy to provide meaningful occupation and a way of sort of stilling the mind by busying the hands, and also a creative therapy as well, a means of expressing an inner voice. So it really started with this extraordinary object, which is an embroidered letter. It was described as a sampler when it was sold at auction to us at Norfolk Museum Service in 2004. And it is, I've actually bought a paper replica of it because I think in some ways you can't really assess what size it is and how big it is and how it would actually work as an object. So it's 1 foot across and then it's 12 long. So I'll just sort of roll it out like that so that you can just see and hopefully kind of keep it out of the way. It's basically a patchwork of fabrics, several layers thick, and it's been put together to create a canvas on which this woman, Lorena Bulwer, who was 63 at the time of making the object, could stitch her words, could write her letter. It's quite thick. It has a certain kind of, several layers, I think, and the needle passes all the way through all of the layers again and again and again. And we think that it probably took about half a year to make each one of these. And I say each one of these because this isn't the only one. And we always knew that there was another one in existence. Somebody had brought in some photographs from another auction, said, I've got pictures of your Lorena Bulwer sampler, looked at it and it was a completely different one. So we knew there was another one somewhere. And I got a phone call in July last year from a curator at the Thackeray Medical Museum in Leeds saying, we have something by Lorena Bulwer, do you know anything about her? And I was extremely excited by this news, obviously, because meaning it's in a public collection, I could actually be able to borrow it and also send all of the researchers who've been looking at our sampler up there. So that's where the exhibition started. It is an address letter. It's addressed to actually some quite influential people. The Maharaja of Kelvedon, who's called Prince Duleep Singh, the Laken family, who are a brewing family, and also the head of Thrigby Hall. But Lorena was actually resident in the female lunatic ward of the Great Yarmouth Workhouse at the time of writing these letters. So it's actually that starts out just sort of around this chap's legs here. One of the first statements she makes is, I, Miss Lorena Bulwer, was examined by Dr. Pinching of Walthamstow, Essex, and found to be a properly shaped female. Now, there's been intensive research done into the 70 named individuals throughout the whole sampler, and Dr. Pinching is the only character, and I call him a character because he doesn't actually exist anywhere. Later on in the letter, she does actually sort of align her sister with being Mrs. Pinching. So, but one of the great issues with working with this as an object is that because, unfortunately, all of the records for the workhouse were bombed during the Second World War, there is no other evidence to talk about how the sampler or how this writing actually might have impacted on her, nor any other evidence to suggest any contextual evidence around what was going on. So, I pressed the wrong button. Thank you. So I've just got some quotes up here from excerpts. Now I think you have to remember the sort of stop-start motion. This is obviously not done in all in one go. So returning to it again and again and picking up the stitching, as well as her thought disturbance, means that actually it's quite a stream of consciousness experience. It's very difficult to read all the way through. And every letter is in capitals. Loads of the words are actually underlined, so this intention to communicate is really, really clear. So it's mostly an angry communication about how she shouldn't really be in the workhouse. So the people are real English tramps, hawkers, show people, not one belong to any of my class, not one here have anything to do with my party. And then this does lead us on to lots of claims about her family. And here she's talking about her brother Edgar. And I'm Miss Lorena Bulwer. Wonder the people have not thrown all the slops of this notorious bug licence the tribe Cambridgeshire socialist den and pelted him with rotten eggs as his socialist Anne, old faggot wife, died. And you can see also down here, she's referencing her mother here, her blessed mother, Auntie Nancy, tickle my fancy. And this is actually a line from a song called Billy Boy, where have you been all the day, Billy Boy? And he's been out with his Nancy Gray and Nancy kittles or tickles me fancy. So she always aligns her mother with this, and it's sort of like in the other sampler, the Leeds one, there's another song that sort of punctuates throughout, which is the Bonnie Bonnets of Old Dundee. So it feels a little bit like an earworm going around and round in the head. And interestingly, one of the contemporary artists who worked with said that she, to deal with her kind of grief, she actually went running, and songs and phrases would appear again and again and again. So she came from a well-to-do background. She mentions in here getting music lessons and learning how to spell. And so why she ended up in a workhouse, which is really the place of last resort when she had so much family, is obviously, again, a question that I can't really answer. However, her antagonism towards them may have meant that they were unwilling or unable to care for her after her mother died. I think she was probably always had mental ill health, but again, cared for in the home by her mother would have been absolutely fine, but when her mother died, left without support, perhaps that contributed to her having to go in. So she talks a lot about, there's several sort of themes that recur as well as her family. There's a definite sense of body horror. There's very visceral descriptions of illnesses, things going on with the body, a repeated use of the phrase eunuch and hermaphrodite, and also many mentions of tricksters and imposters. And in this excerpt, she does come back a lot to the subject of madness, but never in reference to herself. So this one is old mad Molly Hawes, who was taken to Coney Hatch Asylum in a tinker's cart. Strapped in, she looked as if the devil had chased her 3 times through the flames of hellfire, and turned out this hideous, wild, brown-eyed old woman. So, yes, and it's one of these things we were talking about earlier on about, absorption. I think a lot of people, when they look at this, must have kept her quiet, but we don't know whether actually this kind of way of speaking and turning phrase would have actually, manifested itself in her speaking at all. But we can, but yes. But the other thing is that you get sucked into this and you're reading it, and that pervasive image of a sane woman who the evildoers, the manipulative family, have locked her away for some reason. It's such a kind of cultural stereotype that you end up kind of going along and believing her until you're sort of brought up short by I am Princess Victoria, the late Queen Victoria's daughter. Lorena Bulwer was taken to the royal nursery. Queen Victoria's in her infancy. I passing as Miss Lorena Bulwer and living with and on. Nancy tickles my fancy. So taking this object and it's a kind of complexity of issues, and then putting that and its sister sampler right in the centre of the show. This is installation shots taken just yesterday of the exhibition. It's the first time that we've actually managed to unite the samplers and display them in their complete entirety so that people can come and experience the whole thing. And obviously they stand very much apart in the centre of the room. So, building objects around this, and there's several sort of ways it could have gone. I suppose it could have been quite a local history themed, because she mentioned so many places and people, but that would have been a bit boring. Or, there was certain mentions of other types of context, but I chose not to create an exhibition around mental ill health and textiles, because I felt in that way you'd actually be shoehorning different individuals into manifestations, medicalised manifestations of illness. So again, you're imposing a structure from outside and sort of asking these objects to fill out the gaps and change the interpretation in some way. Also, looking at the history of mental health care would come with its own set of issues. I don't want to actually do that to these objects. I don't want to didn't want to include anything in the exhibition that didn't actually come from an individual, from a person. So people suggested, we've got ECT equipment over at Strangers Hall in the medical collections, you can put that in, or We have strong clothing from an asylum in our collection as well, but it wanted nothing from outside in there. So it was all about, what is it that unites certain objects, the textile objects, and it really comes down to therapy and seeking some kind of solace. So this also allowed me to choose objects from our collections, which are quite big. We've got 27,000 objects in the costume and textile collections. Choose them from a variety of different time periods, genders, and used in different ways in different mediums. And also, although I can't really talk about it today, we've used contemporary artists' work as well. In order to, they provide, if you like, a midway point between the historic object and the viewer. So they reinterpret the issues and represent them in a different way. So these are tiny. They're smaller than a postcard, and these are mourning samplers that were made. They're very sort of typical of mourning samplers in that they're monochrome. They have very restrained, and they have on the central one the cypress, and you will also find them with weeping willows or urns, and a woman grieving near an urn, very similarly to prints and other kinds of visual medium. But between the 1823 and 1828, Louisa was 13 in 1823. In that time, when these three samples were made, she lost her mother, her father, and her uncle as well, who presumably was her carer after her parents died, because she was still very young. So they are, the restraint and the precision, there's a very emotive response to that. There's kind of, you can almost see it as being a dutiful act, but I choose not to see them like that. I see them as being very restrained, and again, it's a chance that you're buying yourself some space to process an issue. So and also doing right by the dead as well. So there is an element of that too. The sampler is such a familiar textile. Many people still have the family samplers, and even Narina's letter, as I said earlier on, was called a sampler. It's such a familiar form to us. So the use of text and the text chosen has also been a great inspiration to contemporary textile artists. But they have this kind of, I think, very special power in that I sometimes feel like the girls that made them are almost like butterflies sort of pinned onto a piece of paper. They're stuck in that moment in time. They're always going to be 10 years old, stitching away at the sampler. Really, like looking at a daguerreotype photograph, you're very aware of that sense of mortality. You're very aware this happened a long time ago and that this person is now dead. And more so than any, in this particular one, because Martha Grant, and in 1833 she was aged 10 years and departed this life 1834, aged 11 years. So what I think has happened with this particular sampler is that she and her sister Charlotte were both set the exercise together to complete a sampler. Martha managed to get part way through hers, which is why it doesn't look like a memorial sampler. It looks like an ordinary early 19th century sampler. And then it was completed after her death. Again, a way of completing something by her sister Charlotte. And that's that Charlotte sampler, which came in at the same time. And the central image there of the vase of flowers is exactly the same. So they're definitely working from the same source material. We were extremely fortunate to be able to loan a truly iconic piece of textiles from the Victoria and Albert Museum. This is the sampler made by Elizabeth Parker in around 1830, and it is an extremely controlled exercise in cross-stitch text. And unlike the sort of samplers that you're getting with motifs or anything like that, it's a completely unadorned block of text. And it is, I don't really have enough time to go into all of the complexities. There was a very good article by Morning Daily Goggin examining this, but essentially the sampler begins at the top with setting the scene almost, a little autobiography of Elizabeth Parker, leading to the circumstances which have actually caused her to have, as she calls it, she lost her reason. She's had a breakdown, and it's as a result of ill treatment in a place of employment. And then, from around a third down, it's really reflecting on what has happened, but moreover, thinking it's a very inner voice. So she's actually saying to herself, what am I going to do? and what she's struggling with is the desire to commit the ultimate sin, that of self-slaughter. So she's actually describing here, I got up and I wanted to go to the woods and I wanted to commit that act, but something stopped me. She looked in the Bible, but she's still kind of going back. It's an extraordinarily written piece in the middle there. With a more that I flee to find the Lord, wretch that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death. And this extraordinary thing, I couldn't help, as soon as I read the text all the way through, one thing that really kind of got to me is almost, I see this all the time on samplers. Next unto God, dear parents, I address myself to you in humble thankfulness. It's almost as if Elizabeth is the girl who did not follow that moral verse. She disobeyed her parents. Her parents advised her to stay in one place, and she moved on where this thing happened. It's always like she feels she's brought it on herself by her act of disobedience. And then she's struggling with this kind of, I cannot commit this terrible sin. I can't go against, the law of God. So it's just reflecting on that was quite interesting for me to think about. And if there's this is just the very beginning and the very end of the text, with these kind of tantalising words, as I cannot write, which is an extraordinary statement, really, considering if this is not writing, if writing is just something you do with a pen, what do you call it? And it's like the discussion we had earlier with the word work. Is this something that you've wrought? Is there another word for it? And it does end on a bit of a cliffhanger, all become of my soul. I'd like to reassure you that she did not commit the sin of self-slaughter, but you'll have to come to the exhibition and or look on the V&A's website. And now I return back to the stunning bed hangings of Anna Margareta Brereton, which are in the Norfolk Museum Services collections. And really, after thinking, okay, we're going to do therapy, we'll get the two Lorenas side by side, this was the next obvious one to choose, because it stands in such a stark opposition to this, really, in that this was created by a grieving mother. So between 1781 and 1796, Anna Margareta, who was lived in Brinton Hall in Norfolk, had 10 pregnancies, 10 children, of which only 6 survived infancy. And then in 1800, her eldest son, who was 14 at the time, died very, very suddenly, very unexpectedly. And I have a quote from the sermon which was delivered by the Reverend Upjohn after her death. And this event is actually so important in her life, it's picked out in there. It's having, quote, plunged her into an abyss of sorrow, which well nigh destroyed her mental powers and nearly brought her body to the dust. And that, quote, under the effects of this trial, she laboured for 12 months, sorrowful in spirit indeed. And most poignantly of all, that, quote, tears were her meat day and night. So family history tells us that she began designs for a campaign, and that this was encouraged by friends and family bringing gifts. And it's almost like, bringing something to tempt somebody who's been very ill to eat again. This kind of, look at this one, what could you do with this, what could you do with that? So it's a way of bringing her back into the world. And that is the counterpane, which, astonishing piece of craftsmanship that it is. It actually, I just had it drawn and all of the pattern pieces counted, not by me, I have to say. I think it would drive me slightly over the edge, but there are 2,438 individual pieces within that. So although the sewing may have been a kind of quiet contemplation for her, actually designing this and deciding which ones to choose, I think was something that would have taken a great amount of concentration. And it's also, to me, I don't know, I tend to sort of be quite intuitive with these things. It feels like an act of creation and an act of taking control again when life has dealt you a particular hand that's completely outside of your control, to sort of regain that. But what's really interesting is that it was given to Strangers' Hall, and this is an old postcard probably from the 1930s, in 1929 by Anna Margareta's great-granddaughter and great-grandson. And although any museum of domestic life would, fall over themselves to take something so stunning, the story has always remained with it, which is interesting considering how many of our early objects or early accessioned objects have absolutely no provenance to them whatsoever. So it's always been that the circumstances surrounding it and the role it played in her life have been integral to the understanding. But it's not until the Frayed exhibition that we've actually been able to put it in that context again. So, as I said, able to choose things from lots of different genders as well, and included some soldier patchwork, which, although, you know, it's very difficult to say because this is an early, well, in fact, 1974 it came to our collections and had no provenance with it whatsoever, so unfortunately I can't tell you anything about this, but I do know that it's uniform serges and it's definitely typical of soldier patchwork. So whether it was somebody that was kind of marking out time while they were on active service but nothing was kind of happening, or whether it was actually made in convalescence, I can't be entirely sure. And then the final piece is not, I haven't got a great picture of the completed quilt, but this is sections of patchwork completed by female prisoners in Newgate prison under the prison reform scheme set up by Elizabeth Fry, who's a great Norwich heroine. And what's very interesting again is looking at this is the different levels of skill and the different approaches taken. So within this, around the board, you can see some are all mixed up together, some are very much in stripes, and it was really Elizabeth Fry's aim to give a meaningful occupation and also, very practically, a skill that could be used after, you know, their time of imprisonment or after they've been transported. And it also reminds me as well of the property of textiles. I mean, I showed you how this one came out. They can be folded up, they can be kept quietly, you know, they can be put in a bag and taken from place to place to place often. And that's why still prison work, like fine cell works, takes place. Needlework with people doing that, and it gives not only, as I say, a meaningful frame to the day, but also you look back and you think, well, like, I've done something and I'm connected again to the world in some way. So I'm just concluding by showing you some of the tempting contemporary art, and just concluding really with, obviously they're emotive stories and I'm putting them in a public space in order to get an emotional response from people, but I'm not doing it to make everybody just sad. It's actually more about looking at taking your well-being into your own hands, taking responsibility, doing something. There's a scheme at the moment called 5 Ways to Wellbeing, and one of those ways to wellbeing is to be active and to make connections. And I think that's another important factor, is that none of these people were on their own. You know, everybody's got friends, family, partners, children, unknown benefactors. I mean, who gave Lorena all of these fabrics to make 2 12-foot long letters? You know, somebody was actually supporting that, giving these people, men and women, space, time and resources to actually do what they needed to do.